I like Tenshi. What an amazing way to start a video. The overconfident celestial who actually has the means to back it up. That being the power of throws a rock at you, but often needs to be taken down a peg or two anyways. I'll admit the name I picked for myself, being in reference to her, is part of the reason why the character grew on me, but she's always been among my favorites from the Touhou cast. Even if she's only been playable in fighting games, which are not always my cup of tea. Well, how about a fangame where she's the protagonist going out to solve the incident? Tempest of the Heavens and Earth, the last fangame developed by Dodging Circle Lionheart, first released on August 12, 2013 before coming to Steam with an English translation in 2018. A platformer beat-em-up combo where you take control of the celestial Hinanawi Tenshi, using her innate powers along with the sword Ohiso to wreck anything that stands before you. It has a lot of similarities with the earlier Touhou fighting games made by Twilight Frontier, even down to the UI. I had the chance to play it long ago where the language barrier proved to be a bit of an obstacle when trying to understand the unique mechanics of the game, and of course the story, but thankfully that's not an issue anymore. Speaking of, how about we get into that story right away, because there's actually quite a bit to see here. It pretty much follows on the events of Scarlet Weather Rhapsody, so if you don't know what happens there, some details aren't gonna make much sense, but I'll do my best to cover them. With that said, let's go. Various tremors have been occurring in Gensokyo, signaling the eventual arrival of a big earthquake. Rumors going around in heaven talk about a single suspect, the messenger of the Dragon Palace, Nagae Iku. While everyone chooses to believe the accusations, Tenshi's having none of that and wants to clear the misunderstanding. However, things get even more sketchy once Yakumo Yukari comes into the scene, who by the way wanted to fucking kill the Celestial in Scarlet Weather Rhapsody, with Iku very much agreeing to it. But here she simply throws Tenshi out of heaven and sends her to the ground below. Landing in the bamboo forest of the lost, Tenshi finds herself lacking some of her strength, meaning she can't just simply take to the skies because of course she can't. Not to be deterred by this, she chooses to take the long way around to make it back to heaven and discover the truth behind this conspiracy. She meets Racing along the way, who immediately gets suspicious of Tenshi being the cause of the tremors. Also mentions that her master Erin tried to make a cure for the earthquakes. How does that even work? What, are you just gonna give the earth some ibuprofen and call it a day? After the battle, Tei shows up and is tasked with getting Tenshi out of the forest. And then she just tags along for a while, completely ignoring Raisen's request to return once she's done. In the Nameless Hills, we encounter Mononobe no Futo. She's also out trying to solve the incident, with her main suspect being Moriya Suwako, who she confuses Tenshi with since both have power over the earth. This is obviously played out for the funnies, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Futo was still a relatively new character by the time this game released. In fact, while the full release was in 2013, the first trial versions showed up a year before that in 2012. Generally, fangirls expect you to believe everyone already knows each other, but yeah, it's plausible that Futo would have no idea who Suwako or Tenshi are, and wouldn't be familiar with Gensokyo's landmarks being a new arrival and all. It's some neat attention to detail that I wanted to point out. And then she praises Tenshi as a hero for going after the culprit? She really has no clue at all, does she? I love this goofball. Hoju Nue is just here to be a nuisance. After dealing with her, Yukari shows up to put a stop to Tenshi's plans and sends both of them straight to hell. Just like that, huh? Though not before giving the hint that the person she's looking for might be at Yokan Mountain, which is kinda moot since she had to go there anyways. With the Yokai Nue as her new partner, Tenshi journeys across the underworld towards the faster exit, a geyser that would put them just before the mountain. Which kinda makes you wonder if Yukari really wants to stop Tenshi, because she essentially just gave the gal a shortcut. However, guarding that exit is the Oni Hoshiguma Yugi, who challenges Tenshi to a duel to relieve the boredom of patrolling around. Basically, in true Touhou fashion, they fight just because. She mentions trying to stop the quake with her bare hands, prompting the revelation that everyone looking for ways to end the tremors all at once might actually be making the situation worse. Once out of the underworld, the pair make the long climb up Yokan Mountain, where at the top awaits the real Moriya Suwako. She points the finger at Tenshi, implying that she was the original cause of all this with the keystone she placed in the Hakurei shrine after her incident. It was a measure to prevent earthquakes, though only temporarily, saying as if one doesn't happen when it's supposed to, it just means a bigger one will come in the future. And Tenshi saw no issue with this at all. You darn fool! Suwako also mentions that she and Yukari are working to stop the quakes for good by repairing a second keystone nearby, with Iku helping out of her own free will, and that involving Tenshi would just cause more problems than needed. Nue, having grown somewhat attached to the Celestial, tells Suwako she's full of shit and urges Tenshi to press onward. Which she does, and we come face to face with Yukari again. The plan was to make Tenshi retreat after she learned the truth, but now that she's here, she might as well help stop the earthquake, seeing as it was originally her fault. Iku then finally shows up. She was the first to hear of the anomaly, but since no one in heaven would believe her words, she committed treason and came to the surface to seek help. Tenshi's ready to reluctantly solve the issue when Iku is the one that stopped her. Turns out it was her who didn't want the Celestial to get involved, instead choosing to take matters into her own hands. So here's the deal. Iku is fully aware that Tenshi is the only one capable of calming the earth and dealing with earthquakes, but to avoid involving her, the plan was to sacrifice herself, lend her power to Yukari and Suwako, and hope that might be just enough to deal with the calamity. Once Tenshi beats some much needed sense into her ass, she agrees to let the Celestial do her job. However, in the process, the Sword of Hiso goes out of control, apparently having absorbed the spirit of the earth contained by the keystone, and now threatens to bring forth something even bigger than an earthquake. So now we fight the sword. We are fighting a sword. Alright? A few days later, the tremors finally cease, Tenshi learns a lesson and apparently decides to not use the sword anymore, interesting concept, and everyone relaxes after a job well done. It's a very Touhou-esque story, I guess, but certainly wasn't expecting it to come from a small fangame. Not because they can't have them, but these tend to put more focus on the gameplay rather than an engaging story. It kinda fell apart near the end because of just how dumb Iko's reasoning was. It hits the emotional beats, sure, but instead of going to the one person that can get the job done and clear her name, her immediate reaction was, I don't really get why everyone thought it was her in the first place. If anything, the main suspect of an earthquake should be Tenshi herself, seeing as she had already been the culprit once. Also, I know the answer is, this isn't about them, but what was Reimu doing during all this? Where are the Tengu? This is the Yokamaren and there's no Tengu. Everything after that with the sword was a bit out of nowhere too. I don't know, I guess I sort of wanted a rematch between Tenshi and Yukari. That would have been interesting to see, especially since the final fight against the sword is pathetically easy compared to everything that came before it. Not to mention, the moveset is a bit limited since Tenshi is in the air. For all intents and purposes, Iku is the final boss here, providing a good endgame challenge and closure to the plot. But at least the surprise final boss brings with it an amazing orchestral arrange of Tenshi's theme and honestly, I love this game's soundtrack. It's fantastic, I love me some good arrangements. The stage themes I didn't think much of, but they do a good job at reflecting the locale they're setting. And all the arrangements for the boss themes are great portrayals of the characters' personalities. I love how Futo's theme combines a lot of electronic elements. Kinda funny considering her character. And of course the final boss theme I mentioned earlier, which is a great piece to bring a close to, I guess what would be Tenshi's character arc. There was this moment at the end where it was just completely silent for some reason, no sound effects or anything. It was kinda weird. At the end of the day, the whole thing is set up as sort of a redemption arc for Tenshi, and in that sense it does the job, and again, for coming from a small fangame, I found it to be pretty great. There's plenty of character interactions that would make sense even in canon too, and are always nice to see. That's one of the reasons I like fanwars in general. Even as you go through the stages or during boss fights, there is some banter between Tenshi and the other characters which is a bit hard to read amidst everything else going on, but they can be pretty fun. The game spans 6 stages, each with a boss at the end. Well, more like 5, seeing as the last one is just a boss fight. Tenshi can either shoot, attack enemies directly, or use spell cards to defeat them and gather spirit, which can then be spent to get more moves, shot types and spells. You can even have 4 different setups of these that you can swap at any time, though I only found myself using 2 at most. I don't really see how you could use all of them. There's this style suppression thing that makes the ones you haven't used in a while stronger, in an effort to encourage switching between styles, but it didn't seem like a significant boost. The spell cards didn't see much action in my playthrough either. They are pretty flashy and can make for good combo finishers or for dealing with a boss quickly, but I just find it more fun to get in there with melee attacks. That's why I focus on getting all the techniques first, since it's what gets the most use and they're all always available, instead of having to equip just one. There's a good variety here considering the length of the game, though you can probably get all of them by the time you reach the halfway point. My favorite has to be the headbutt. I mean, come on, it looks great as a finisher. Let me tell you right now, I am the button mashing bitch. But in my defense, most enemies have so little health that attempting to do combos on them was often a worse idea than just keeping it simple. Well, except when there are groups of them where it can feel great to just unleash everything you got as you dance your way through them. There's no way to practice this when you get them though. You can only hit enemies when they're close to you. If you're far away, you just fire your shot. There are different shot types available, each suiting a different playstyle, though at the end of the day, all of them fulfill the same purpose of dealing with some annoying enemy that you can't reach. You're definitely not gonna be getting even a fraction of the damage output melee attacks have. There were a few times where this system was a bit awkward, when I wanted to follow up on a combo, but the game considered I was not close enough and instead used the shot. It's usually not a problem since the result is the same, just with a bit more disappointment, but for bosses it can mean the difference between dealing with it right then and there and having to endure a second round of their attacks. Tenshi can also use the Sword of Hiso to deal damage, but its main use is grasping enemy spirits to trigger a weather effect. However, to do this, you first gotta dash through their attack, kinda like a parry, and this took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out. Seriously, I got stuck in this section for a good 5 minutes before I realized that I had to make it rain to get rid of the fire. And yes, the game does tell you about it, I am just dumb. All weathers give you different benefits for a brief amount of time, some of which are used to progress through the stages, like extinguishing fires that block your way, or freezing the water so you can walk on it. Note that both dashing and using the sword drop on the same bar, which you can only have 4 charges of at a time, so triggering a weather effect is gonna take up 2 of these, and managing it can be a bit tricky until you get used to it. You might have noticed that there is no health bar. Tenshi's HP is represented by the color of the aura around her, and it reaches automatically. I'm more of a fan of having a visible health bar, so I have a better idea of when I can take risks, but this is a very minor detail. Bosses are definitely the best part of this game. If you played Hisou Tensoku, well, they work exactly the same here. They have a number of spell cards, each with their own health bar and an amulet bar. The idea is to drain that amulet first to stun them and then go to town with the combos. And if done right, just one turn should be enough to get through it. And yes, bosses do have a unique weather effect, but most of what it does is make the process easier. Still useful to get it though. They can be a bit intimidating the first time around, but once you get them down, it's very satisfying to completely decimate bosses, or pulverize as the game calls it. The one I remember having some trouble with is Sueko's last spell, where you have very little time to get hits in and getting hit by her curses you, which stuns your health regen. But that's just an exception. Some of them get a bit creative, especially for the characters that haven't showed up in fighting games. Like Nui having you use her own bullets to shoot her down before you can actually do damage, and then 2001 Space Odyssey? What? Also, I'm pretty sure every boss has an alternate last spell too. It only happened to be with Raisin and Nue. I don't know if there's a certain requirement or if I just got lucky, but it was quite a surprise. It's a good thing that the boss fights are enjoyable because the stages are alright. They're very platformy stages, if you will. Very run-of-the-mill. I kinda wish this game went the exploration route for its stages, allowing the player to use different weather effects to reach hidden areas or alternate paths. There are a couple times when this happens, but all you get are these spots when you can stick your sword in to get a small amount of spirit. Thing is, you also find a bunch of them in the main path, and you're gonna be getting most of your spirit from enemies anyway, so not much point in going out of your way to find this. Also, let's talk about weather effects. I mentioned they are used to get through obstacles, which can be pretty fun to do, yet I feel like there could have been more done with the concept. Most of the time the solution is put right in front of you as a respawning enemy. Another reason why I think the level design could have benefited a lot from an exploration approach, giving the player more freedom to experiment with the weather effects. There are very few cases where I felt like I was doing something smart by using it to make the path a bit easier, or just straight up find a way around a section, and it was really fun to discover those things. Then there's stage 5, which goes a bit overboard with everything. Listen, I know it's the proper final stage, but there are so many parts where it's required to use the weather to progress, and again, the novelty of that mechanic wears off real quick. But it sure does slow the game down, making it feel longer than it is. Anyways, now that the rant is over, I will say that the stages do bring a good challenge. Enemies are often placed in big groups that can be hard to break, but as mentioned before, Tenshi has many tools at her disposal to deal with them. Do you take it easy and shoot them down from far away? Do you slam head first to bring in the pain directly? Or do you just say fuck it and use a spell card? There are a few sections which could be a bit annoying, but it never really got frustrating. You have infinite lives and checkpoints are very generous, so you can get back to where you died pretty quickly and resume your journey. Visually the levels are very blocky. I don't know how else to put it. There's nothing going on in them and the colors can look very dull. The underworld is probably the worst offender here, I mean Jesus. Which is a shame because the sprite work and all the different effects look great. The animations for the characters are very fluid and gives them a lot of personality. It makes for quite a spectacle to watch Tenshi do her thing, and combined with the very crunchy sound effects, it makes it, again, very satisfying to pull off combos. But you end up with this very obvious contrast between two elements that got different amounts of attention. It's a little bit distracting sometimes. Also, the character portraits are very boobs, and they look completely different from the sprites. Just thought I mentioned that. But again, I still think the highlight are the boss fights. They are a good test of your skills, and they improve on a system that Touhou is already familiar with. If only there was a way to play only the boss fights and nothing else. Really, this is the 4th game in a row I've looked at that has a boss rush. It's easy to implement, I guess, I don't know. There's not one, but 2 boss rush modes, which was fun to do with the better understanding I had of the game after beating it. Didn't bother with the other one though, the lunatic boss attack. It's just harder versions of the bosses with Tenshi having less health. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have anything unique to it. Aside from this, beating the game unlocks training mode, where Nue shit talks you and you can practice combos by jolting her around. Combo attack is just trying to do the best combo you can in 10 seconds. I didn't really spend much time with it. There are a whole bunch of achievements to do for completionists, and getting enough of them unlocks some extras, like concept art and such, which is always neat to browse and pretty interesting to see from a fangame. Only managed to nab 2 of these unlocks though. The achievements here seem to be the kind of you gotta get really good at the game to get them, and I'm just not up for it. Honestly, it was fun to play through this just to uncover the story and see dialogue between characters that you don't often see together. That's one of the things that kept me going through the stages, the other being that I knew a good boss fight was awaiting at the end of them. The stages could have been so much better. The weather mechanic has a lot of potential in my eyes. But as it stands, I still think Tempest of the Heavens and Earth is a good fangame, and that's not Tenshi Hinanawi speaking, I promise. It's fun to play around with the different moves, the writing is great following on a story from an official game, and it's got a top tier soundtrack to keep you going. Lionheart hasn't been active since this game released on Steam, so I don't think we'll be seeing more releases from the team, though I'm definitely interested in checking out some of their past work someday. But anyways, that's all I got for this one. As always, thank you all for watching, and see you next stream.